Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, President Trump touts a total reset with China as both countries agree to drastically cut tariffs. But he also warns that China tariffs could go much higher if a deal isn't reached in a few months. Iris Tao has the latest in U.S.-China trade tensions. The president today also signing a sweeping executive order directing pharmaceutical companies to lower drug costs. The order aims to bring U.S. drug prices in line with those paid in other nations. Luis Martinez explains. President Trump says costs for Medicaid and Medicare will soon drop. He says they'll be directly affected by his new executive order to lower prescription drug prices. Hamas terrorists have released Israeli-American hostage Idan Alexander. He'd been held for more than 19 months in the Gaza Strip. Jack Bradley brings us that update. Families of hostages still held in Gaza react to Alexander's release. Meanwhile, Israel's prime minister says that hostage negotiations will continue under fire. Jason Perry reports.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. President Trump signed an executive order today to bring the cost of prescription drugs in the U.S. down. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
Today, Americans spend 70% more for prescription drugs than we spent in the year 2000. Starting today, the United States will no longer subsidize the health care of foreign countries.
Despite having just 4% of the world's population, the United States market makes up for 2/3 of the profits earned by pharmaceutical companies through sales worldwide. The president's executive order does not target pharmaceuticals, but it does demand a most favored nation status for the United States to access prescription drugs at lower prices.
It's just a redistribution of wealth. It's a redistribution where it could be the same top line, but it's going to be distributed differently. Europe's going to have to pay a little bit more. The rest of the world's going to have to pay a little bit more, and America's going to pay a lot less.
According to the Trump administration, European Union nations pay a fraction of the prices that the United States pays for the same medications.
One breast cancer drug costs Americans over $16,000 per bottle. But the same drug from the same factory, manufactured by the same company, is 1/6 that price in Australia and 1/10 that price in Sweden.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. noted that lowering prescription drug prices was a hallmark proposal of prominent Democratic leaders like Senator Bernie Sanders during his 2020 presidential campaign.
Congress is controlled in so many ways by the pharmaceutical industry. There's at least one pharmaceutical lobbyist for every congressman, every senator in Capitol Hill, and every member of the Supreme Court. By some estimates, 3.
President Trump signed a similar executive order during his first term in office to have Medicare have access to prescription drugs at lower prices. The executive order was halted by a federal court.
This means American patients were effectively subsidizing socialist healthcare systems in Germany, in all parts of the European Union.
This Monday's executive order will likely be challenged in courts. It remains to be seen whether congressional Republicans will move ahead and codify the president's initiative. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
President Trump says Medicaid and Medicare costs will be going down after signing an executive order aimed at lowering prescription drug prices. House Republicans are also working on implementing spending cuts to the two programs, while Democrats oppose the move. NTD correspondent Jason Blair reports.
Medicaid costs are going down and Medicare costs are going down.
President Trump says he expects a, quote, tremendous cut to Medicare and Medicaid costs because of his executive order geared at lowering prescription drug prices.
That cut will be massive because drugs are 50–60% of the cost. So
President Trump signed the executive order on Monday. On True Social, he says that in the near future, prescription drug prices will drop by 30 to 80%. Also in Congress, spending cuts for Medicare and Medicaid are part of the big, beautiful bill House Republicans are working on. They say the cuts are rooting out waste, fraud, and abuse. Democrats have criticized the cuts, saying they'd harm the healthcare industry. Republican Rep. Scott Perry says that the spending cuts are in two main areas. One is reducing the $100 billion in improper payments he says are made every year in the system.
The wrong amount to the wrong people.
The other is to stop payments to illegal immigrants and to people who are able to work but don't.
The biggest population currently receiving Medicaid benefits are single able-bodied individuals who do not work. Well, that's not what the program was supposed to be designed for. It's not what it was designed for.
One way Republicans say to do that is through a new requirement for able-bodied adults without dependents to show 80 hours per month of either work, education, or service. New Mexico's Governor Michelle Grisham says that the cuts would negatively affect the healthcare industry economically and make it harder for everyday Americans to access care.
I think something like 432 hospitals across the country are on the edge right now. About a third of their funding comes from Medicaid.
On Sunday, Republicans revealed that the big, beautiful bill will include at least $880 billion in spending cuts, mainly coming from Medicare and Medicaid. And that is to compensate for the planned $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. Republicans have the goal of passing the bill by Memorial Day. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
As the U.S. and China agree to lower tariffs temporarily, President Trump touts a reset with Beijing while warning he could ramp up tariffs further if a deal doesn't materialize. The White House also tells NTD that a 120% tariff remains in place for small packages from China. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao has more.
We achieved a total reset with China.
And calling it a total reset, President Trump touts a breakthrough as the U.S. and China agreed to lower tariffs and continue talks. For the next 90 days, U.S. tariffs on China will go down from 145% to 30%, and China will also cut its tariffs on U.S. goods from 125% to now 10%. And President Trump says China also agreed to remove non-monetary trade barriers and open up to American markets.
Think about it. We opened up our country to China. They have very few restrictions, and they didn't open their country to us. Never made sense to me. It's not fair. And they've agreed to open China, fully open China.
The latest agreement comes after a month of escalation in which the U.S. and China hiked tariffs on each other and had no official talks until the past weekend. Secretary Scott Bessent, after meeting with Chinese officials in Switzerland, says talks will continue as the administration seeks to balance out the massive trade deficit with China.
There will also be the possibility of purchase agreements to pull what is our largest bilateral trade deficit into balance.
That said, the deal is not finalized, and President Trump says that if they fail to reach a final deal on paper, which could take a while, tariffs will go up on China substantially.
But they would go up substantially higher.
There are also exceptions to the tariffs cuts, especially in critical industries.
And it doesn't include tariffs on cars, steel, aluminum, things such as that.
The administration has warned that China has been flooding the global markets with cheap steel and aluminum, creating potential national security and defense loopholes for the U.S. And a White House official also confirmed to NTD that small packages under the value of $800 from China are still subject to tariffs of 120%. That's a major blow for Chinese e-commerce platforms like Shein and Temu, which relied on the previous tariff exemption to sell cheap Chinese products to U.S. customers. Reporting by Iris Tao, NTD News.
As the Trump administration sets a hopeful tone on trade with China, what will it take to fully open China to U.S. goods? Tune into NTD's Capital Report at 7 p.m. Eastern for analysis from Thomas Duesterberg, Senior Fellow at the Hudson Institute. After more than 580 days in Hamas captivity, Israeli-American Edan Alexander is free. This comes as President Trump heads to the Middle East. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Edan Alexander, an American citizen who, until recently, most thought was no longer living, thought was dead, is going to be released in about 2 hours.
Edan Alexander is the last known living American hostage in Gaza to be released. The 21-year-old from New Jersey was serving in the Israeli military when he was captured outside of Gaza on October 7, 2023. Monday's release was the result of indirect negotiations between the U.S. and Hamas, and these were led by Special Envoy Steve Witkoff.
Before the eyes of Steve Witkoff, who has done a fantastic job.
Trump also said the move was a step in good faith by the mediators, Egypt and Qatar. Negotiations are ongoing in Qatar to release the remaining 58 hostages, including the bodies of 4 other Americans. Meanwhile, President Trump is heading to the Middle East to meet first with leaders in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday morning. Between then and Friday, he'll be in Qatar and then the UAE. He's expected to discuss important regional issues like the Israel-Hamas war and ongoing nuclear talks with Iran. But the main announcement will be investment deals from these countries in U.S. technology, AI, and defense. Saudi Arabia recently pledged to invest $600 billion over the next 4 years into the United States. The UAE committed $1.4 trillion in U.S. manufacturing, energy, and technology over the next decade. And on top of that, major U.S. weapon sales to Saudi Arabia and Qatar are taking place. And Trump says Qatar is gifting the U.S. a 747 aircraft to replace the current Air Force One, which is now 40 years old. And regarding Thursday's expected peace talks between Russia and Ukraine and Turkey, Trump said he might take a detour during his trip to attend if he thinks it's helpful.
I don't know where I'm going to be at that particular point. I'll be someplace in the Middle East, but I would fly there if I thought it would be helpful.
This is President Trump's first major foreign trip of his second term, following a recent visit to the Vatican for Pope Francis's funeral about 2 weeks ago. During his first term, Trump also chose the Middle East for his first foreign trip. But at that time, he also visited Israel. But Trump did meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House twice since Trump's second term. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Following the release of the American hostage, family members of other hostages are calling for their loved ones to be freed as well. Some are expressing hope this latest development will lead to the release of additional hostages. NTD's Jason Perry has the story.
On Monday, residents marched in Tel Aviv to mark the birthday of hostage Guy Gilboa Dalal, who's been in Hamas captivity for over a year and a half. Gilboa Dalal's father said he was thankful that American hostage Edan Alexander was about to be released, and added this.
President Trump is not waiting for Israel to make a deal, and is making the deal for his citizens individually. So I hope that it will lead to release of more hostages.
A resident in Israel also reacted to the news that American hostage Edan Alexander would be released.
I'm thrilled, I'm so happy that one of us is finally coming back. But unfortunately, it's frustrating that, America had to do our job to get him back.
Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Alexander's release was achieved through Israel's military pressure and diplomatic pressure exerted by President Trump.
I spoke today with President Trump. He told me, I am committed to Israel. I am committed to continuing to work in close coordination with you to achieve all our war objectives, to release all the hostages, and to defeat Hamas.
In a statement released by the Prime Minister's office, Netanyahu said negotiations to release the hostages will take place under fire as Israeli forces increase operations in the Gaza Strip. And on the same day, residents in the Gaza Strip were seen searching through the rubble after a reported Israeli airstrike hit a building sheltering displaced residents early Monday morning. A resident in the Gaza Strip shared his thoughts.
Since we are hearing in the news that Hamas wants to release the American hostage, Alexander, we demand the entry of aid because we are starving and we do not have food, flour, or anything.
And in another development, President Trump gave an update after the fourth round of nuclear talks were held with Iran.
We want Iran to be wealthy and wonderful and happy and great, but they can't have a nuclear weapon. It's very simple. So I think they understand that I mean business, and I think they're being very reasonable thus far.
Iran's president on Sunday claimed that they do not want a nuclear weapon and that they need the nuclear technology for civilian purposes, such as healthcare and agriculture. Jason Perry, NTD News.
India and Pakistan said today there was no firing reported overnight along the heavily militarized region between their countries. That is the first time in recent days the two nations were not shooting at each other. The two countries reached an understanding to stop all military actions on Saturday in a U.S.-brokered ceasefire. India said today that it has reopened 32 airports that were shut down during clashes with its neighbor Pakistan. Pakistan's airport authority fully reopened its airspace on Saturday. India and Pakistan have delayed talks between their militaries to discuss the next steps after a ceasefire. Talks are now scheduled to take place this evening. Hostilities between the countries followed a deadly attack on tourists in Kashmir. India accused Pakistan of backing the terrorists who carried out the massacre, a charge Islamabad denies. Coming up, President Trump announces a gift plane from Qatar, but Democrats say accepting it would be a violation of the Constitution. Arlene Richards reports. Governor Gavin Newsom introduces a new model ordinance to help California cities remove homeless encampments, offering a path to tackle the crisis statewide. Christina Corona has the highlights from today's announcement. And Transport Secretary Sean Duffy laid out the causes for recent chaos at Newark Airport. He also listed the work the Trump administration is doing to fix and replace the airport's outdated system. That and more when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Ethics questions have been raised after President Trump announced the Defense Department was being gifted a 747 plane. Some Democrats say accepting it would violate the Constitution. NTD's Arlene Richards has both sides.
President Donald Trump posted on Sunday the Defense Department is getting a new plane, and it's coming from Qatar. He said the gift, free of charge, would temporarily replace the 40-year-old Air Force One. But some Democrats say accepting gifts from foreign countries is illegal. Senators Chuck Schumer and Adam Schiff responded to the news on X. Schumer said it's not just bribery, it's premium foreign influence with extra legroom. Schiff posted, "No person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept of any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state," citing the Constitution's Titles of Nobility and Foreign Emoluments Clause, which historically applied to the then customary European practice of giving gifts to foreign diplomats. Qatari officials said on Sunday that the possible transfer of an aircraft for temporary use as Air Force One is currently under consideration between Qatar's Ministry of Defense and the U.S. Department of Defense. But the matter remains under review by the respective legal departments, and no decision has been made, they added. In February, the president toured a 13-year-old Boeing airplane to check out new hardware and technology features. White House Communications Director Stephen Chung said at that time, this highlights the project's failure to deliver a new Air Force One on time as promised. At a press conference on Monday, Trump said the Boeing project was way behind.
And it's going to be a while before we get them. And I think Qatar, who we've helped them a lot over the years in terms of security and safety. I think they, and very, very nicely, and I have a lot of respect for the leadership and for the leader, Qatar. And I think they knew about it because they buy Boeings. They buy a lot of Boeings. And they knew about it, and they said, we would like to do something.
Trump also said it was a great gesture from Qatar and that he would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said before Trump's post that any gift given by a foreign government is always accepted in full compliance with all applicable laws. It remains to be seen whether or not the gift will be challenged by members of Congress. But ABC reports that Attorney General Pam Bondi and Trump's top White House lawyer David Warrington concluded it would be legally permissible, as long as ownership of the aircraft is later transferred to Trump's presidential library before the end of his term. Trump is visiting the Middle East starting Tuesday. Qatar is on his itinerary. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
In their latest immigration enforcement move, the Department of Homeland Security is asking California to turn over records from its immigrant benefits program. The state program, called Cash Assistance Program for Immigrants, assists lawfully admitted immigrants who are ineligible for Social Security payments due to their immigration status. DHS is requesting numerous documents to determine whether any illegal immigrants receive Social Security payments. According to DHS, under the Biden administration, more than 2 million ineligible illegal aliens received a Social Security number in fiscal year 2024 alone. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem said in a statement today that the Trump administration wants to, quote, make sure those in this country illegally are not receiving federal benefits or other financial incentives to stay illegally. California Governor Gavin Newsom is urging local governments to clear homeless encampments using a new model ordinance. He says the plan is ready to implement immediately and is backed by billions in state funding. NTD's Christina Corona tells us more.
Governor Gavin Newsom says there are no more excuses for people being unhoused across California. On Monday, the governor's office called on cities to ban homeless encampments on public sidewalks, on bike paths, and places like this riverbed behind me.
It is time to take back the streets. It's time to take back the sidewalks. It's time to take these encampments and provide alternatives. And the state is giving you more resources than ever. And it's time, I think, to just end the excuses and call the question. It's about accountability.
Governor Gavin Newsom can't force cities to enforce the ban, but he's offering a model ordinance with key rules cities can use to remove tents from public properties. The ordinance includes rules against long-term camping in one spot and blocking sidewalks. It also requires local officials to give notice and offer shelter before removing any encampments. Newsom says he's not interested in funding failure.
But we have now, we've numerically stress tested this. Over 16,000 encampments we've cleaned up at the state level. That's unprecedented in the state's history. We'll do more. We have to do more. We have a model ordinance that the state is using, and that's what now I want to see happen in other municipalities across California.
The governor's office also cites a U.S. Supreme Court ruling that allows penalties for sleeping in public spaces. Newsom said in a statement Monday, there's nothing compassionate about letting people die on the streets. He says the encampments pose safety risks and expose people to crime, sexual violence, and unsanitary conditions. California's homeless population is estimated at 187,000, including about 75,000 in L.A. County. The announcement comes with $3.3 billion from Proposition 1 to expand mental health housing and services. Newsom says there need to be consequences for cities and counties that aren't cleaning up encampments, without specifying what those consequences would be. He also says he'll address the funding in his budget on Wednesday. Governor Gavin Newsom is expected to hold a news conference later today to discuss funding aimed at tackling the state's homelessness crisis and expanding mental health services. Reporting from the city of El Monte, Christina Corona, NTD News.
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy today addressing the recent chaos at the Newark Liberty International Airport. He blamed the recent disruptions on the Biden administration, saying they moved control of Newark airspace from New York to Philadelphia without making necessary improvements to the underlying infrastructure. He said there were issues with the system last October and November that former President Biden and former Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg would have been aware of but did not address. Duffy listed the work the Trump administration is doing to fix the issues. This includes replacing copper lines with fiber at Newark, JFK, and LaGuardia airports, installing additional telecommunications connections, and adding a computerized STARS system at Philadelphia to manage the flow of aircraft.
It's taken some time to isolate the problem, and we believe we've done that, but I don't think we're out of the woods yet. We actually have to spend the time now to build the network that should have been built before the TRACON was moved. I know this is frustrating. I know it's hard for the airlines operating out of Newark, the families that fly out of Newark. It's problematic. But our commitment is always safety. We're going to make sure that if you fly, you're going to fly safely. And if we reduce the number of flights at Newark, we're not doing it to annoy people. We're not doing it to delay people's travel. What we're doing is guaranteeing safety.
Secretary Duffy warned that similar issues seen at Newark could be seen at other airports. He said the Trump administration is calling on Congress for the resources to fix these air traffic problems. Coming up, do Americans pay more for prescription drugs compared to other countries? President Trump says yes and is taking action to reverse this trend. Our data reporter Kevin Hogan takes a deep dive into the president's latest executive order. And will Trump get the congressional support he needs to make these lower prices stick? And is it possible to lower drug prices without stifling research for new medications? Thomas Savage from the American Institute for Economic Research joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump signed an executive order to help bring down the cost of prescription drugs. It aims to give Americans the best deal compared to people of other countries buying similar drugs. To do that, his administration will give big pharma companies price targets. How much does Trump expect this order to help? And does the U.S. pay more for medicine than other countries? NTD's data reporter Kevin Hogan looks into this.
President Trump is hoping that this will make a big dent in those prescription drug prices, and Americans do pay more for prescription drugs than people across the world. Now, specifically, President Trump said on Truth Social that he hopes that this executive order can bring drug prices down to about 80% off. So that's a range 30% to 80%. That's his upper bound that he's hoping will help people, Americans, in getting the medicines they need. Trump says that Americans spend 5 to 10 times as many dollars on medicines that other people across the world spend. And he says, so how is he going to do this? Well, price targets. Those have been labeled price controls. There's been a little bit of pushback against the use of those, and also cutting out the middleman. And he says that if these companies don't lower their prices, he's going to tell the HHS to take aggressive action on that. Now, let's look at some of the price comparisons for prescription drugs across the world. So you can see in orange, the United States pays more for prescription drugs than a lot of these countries. This is according to the RAND Corporation. It's a nonprofit analysis and research group. They use 2022 data. This is 2024. This was when it was published. And these are wealthy economies that they've sampled. So you can see, for example, the United States, Americans are paying about twice as much as people in Mexico, and the same with Canada, and that keeps rising all the way up to Japan, where Americans are spending almost 3 times as much as the Japanese, right? Now, on average, those 32 wealthy nations, those high-income nations, that's 2.78 times as much Americans are paying for prescription drugs than those other countries, right? So as a result of all this, you might say, well, give me some examples here. Well, let's just take one drug from Johnson & Johnson, Stelara. This is used to treat Crohn's disease. That's a disease of the gut lining. And now, for example, in the United Kingdom, you might pay about $16,000 for a year's supply, whereas in the United States, you're paying $79,000. So this is almost 5 times more than what they pay in the United Kingdom. Now let's look at another example. So you take Bristol-Myers Squibb's Eliquis, right? So this is a blood thinner, helps people to prevent stroke. Okay, so in Canada, you're paying $900 for a year's supply, France, $650, but in the United States, that's $7,100. To give you an example, that's about 11 times as much Americans are paying than people in France for this one particular prescription drug. That said, the CEO of Bristol-Myers Squibb has pushed back on this, saying that this is in stark contrast to many systems outside the United States, which, while they may deliver lower prices, carry an often overlooked trade-off that patients often wait longer for new medicines. So this is Christopher Berner. He's the CEO of Bristol-Myers Squibb. So he's basically saying that Americans do get value while they're paying higher prices because they don't have to wait quite as long. And that's what he told NBC in 2024. Now, when you look at the generic prices, though, that's where Americans actually do pay a little bit less. So if you take for example, you take this RAND study, right? You look at, well, Americans are paying about a third what Canadians pay for the generic drugs, and then that goes up to about half compared to what Germans pay, and they took the average of those 32 wealthy nations, and they found that Americans are paying just a little bit more than half of what people in other countries pay for generic drugs. And generic drugs make up about 90% of the total drug volume consumed in the United States, prescription drugs, but it's just that their costs are so low, so they don't really make a dent in that bigger average, thus Americans are paying more. Now, it is possible that Big Pharma won't take this sitting down, and they may take this to court to put a block on what Trump is doing here. Back to you.
Joining us now to discuss President Trump's new executive order is public policy analyst Thomas Savage. He's a research fellow at the American Institute for Economic Research. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you. Now, President Trump and the White House hailing this as a tremendous win for Americans. Details remain scarce on how much money the White House anticipates this will save. How are you viewing this announcement?
Well, I would say don't pop the champagne just yet, because
As Kevin mentioned in the previous segment there, it's ultimately, it sounds like price controls, it sounds like government bullying. And of course, I'm glad that he brought up that Americans are paying more for prescription drugs. But why is that? That comes from government. 26 cents of every dollar that the federal government spends goes towards some form of health program, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, or the Affordable Care Act subsidies and tax credits. Ultimately, healthcare policy is shaped by all of that funding, and healthcare regulations at the federal and at the state level are geared so that those taxpayer dollars keep flowing into those programs. And ultimately, that impacts the care we receive, the innovation that's allowed under the massive burdensome regulations as well. It is really, really burdensome. And so the best thing to do really for President Trump would be to get government out of the way, loosen some of those restrictions, like in the executive order he issued last month, talking about making it easier for generic drugs to get to the market.
Now, President Trump tried something similar during his first administration, but promptly saw pushback from within the Republican Party, courts, and of course, Big Pharma. Will Trump succeed this time, or can he?
Well, the jury's still out on that, and as Kevin mentioned in the previous segment, it seems like there will definitely be some legal challenges there. Whether or not HHS has the scope of authority to do so is a question really for the lawyers. But at the end of the day, I could see this getting pulled into a fight, potentially a long drawn one.
Now, expanding on that, President Biden also immediately overturned President Trump's initiative the first time around. Many are saying it would take legislation to be passed in both the House and Senate, then signed into law by the president for this to really stick. How likely are we to see that?
Well, it's looking tough there. And as we see right now in Congress, they're trying to pass much needed Medicaid reforms, because that's another aspect of healthcare where folks are seeing really poor quality and it's costing taxpayers billions of dollars. So nobody's winning there. But that seems to be a long fight. And some folks on both sides of the aisle just want to keep the status quo going. So unfortunately, I can't hold my breath on Congress doing the right thing anytime soon.
And Thomas, to one of your earlier points, drug manufacturers and free market advocates are pushing back, saying this will create shortages and undercut funding for researching new medications. What are you anticipating we'll see on that front?
I think they hit the nail on the head there. It's inevitably a price tells us how much of something is available and how badly other people want it. And when prices aren't allowed to move freely with that information gets distorted. And so what we'll see is that there are way more people that are willing to pay for a certain drug or a certain healthcare service, but there will be a shortage. And as was mentioned in the previous, as Kevin mentioned, that quote from Mr. Berner there, it was in these other countries that might be paying less in a currency amount, they're paying more in other ways. They're paying in rationing, they're paying in wait times as well. So folks in those other countries could go months without getting the drug that they need, or have to visit the doctor 2-3 times before a doctor is willing to issue them a prescription.
Now, given that Americans do pay more for prescription drugs, what would lower drug prices for Americans without stifling that research?
So without stifling that research by, of course, lowering prices, you don't want to just look at what the price is. You don't want to reason from a price change. You want to understand why the price is getting lower. If that's coming from increased competition, getting government out of the way, making it easier for generic drugs to produce alternate or substitute versions of, say, these expensive name brand drugs. If you're seeing reductions in regulations at the FDA or reductions in import controls to buy similar drugs from other countries, we'll see the price lower, and that means more options, more competition among healthcare service and pharmaceutical providers, and lower costs for Americans, which will be great. But if prices are brought down because of these price controls, we're going to see a lot of pain. We're going to see shortages. We're going to see rationing of medical care.
And Thomas, there's also growing concern about the reliance on China for pharmaceuticals and active ingredients with their substandards over there. With the current thaw in the U.S.-China trade war, how likely are we to see a reshoring in pharmaceuticals from countries like China?
I think we could expect at least some. I think we could expect it. But again, that situation is still pretty volatile. While we did get some good news today, we are still seeing some volatility over there. And I think while markets, the general market, the stock market is doing great, markets react to information, whether that be accurate or not. How accurate that information is could be up to debate. And markets react to information, but people and businesses, they react to costs. And ultimately, I think if there is a lot of uncertainty around the situation regarding China, we may see some of that. But maybe tensions will ease and we'll see some of that resume of what previously. But it definitely won't look exactly like what it did before this administration came into office.
A lot to watch for sure. Thomas Savage, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
President Trump today signing an executive order aimed at lowering pharmaceutical prices in the United States. What do everyday Americans make of this move? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from them.
I think they're overpriced compared to other countries at the same caliber we are that pay a lot less for their prescription drugs.
I know it's outrageous, the prices. Something has to be done.
I think they're out of control. Even for myself, I have asthma. My inhaler costs $175. If I didn't have good insurance, how am I affording that?
As a cancer survivor, I spent $12,000 a day on chemo for 14 days. That adds up. That's a lot of money.
I do believe the drug prices are too high. I believe the drug companies can get by with making less. And I believe it would help the deficit in this country, which is, to me, the #1 financial issue going forward.
President Trump signed an executive order aimed at reducing prices of pharmaceuticals. And basically what he's trying to do is to align prices here with those of other countries. Because given that we do pay a lot more than other countries for the same drugs, what do you make of President Trump's move here?
I think it's a great move. These people who are running these pharmaceutical companies are reaping all kinds of money. And here we are, everybody struggling just to make ends meet.
Certainly, and I believe that Biden started that as well, by lowering costs for insulin and stuff.
One step at a time, right?
That's right.
I think it's a good move. However, it does worry me some bit that it may hinder some of the pharmaceutical companies from investing in research for new drugs.
We'll see how it all shakes out. It's great to have an executive order, but these things are very complicated from a business perspective. We'll see how the courts rule, and we'll see how the drug companies react. But playing around with pricing in a free economy is very tricky.
Lowering drug costs for families that need insulin, chemotherapy drugs, all that, that's good news. If we're going to lower costs of things that people need to survive and families need for their children to survive and to live healthier and be happier, I'm all for it.
Coming up in the NBA, Hall of Famer Michael Jordan making a return to basketball. Dave Martin joins us with the details. And a parade through London celebrates World Falun Dafa Day and the positive changes practitioners experience through the values of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. Malcolm Hudson has the highlights after the break. Now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, plenty going on right now, but let's start in the NBA as NBC has announced Hall of Famer Michael Jordan will join their broadcast team this fall. What will his specific role be?
Yeah, they said he'll be a special contributor, so it sounds like, of course, they're still figuring it out. But of course, plenty of ex-basketball players go into broadcasting and have been very successful, like Charles Barkley, Shaquille O'Neal, and the TNT crew. But anyway, for Jordan, since he retired in 2003, of course, he's remained active in the NBA. He owned the Charlotte Hornets for a number of years. 2 years ago, he sold them. He also was involved in that documentary, The Last Dance, that came out during the pandemic, generated a lot of headlines there. But anyway, NBC coming back to the NBA. Now, they actually broadcast the NBA from 1990 through 2002, so that was all during Jordan's title years with the Chicago Bulls. But anyway, Tiff, they've paid, of course, billions of dollars to get back into the NBA coverage. So that starts this fall, and I think Jordan will actually be a big draw. I'm kind of interested to see how he is, in broadcasting.
So a cushy seat. Well, moving to NFL news. Today, the league released some of its 2025 regular season schedule. What do you see as some of the key matchups?
Well, as usual is the defending champions, Philadelphia Eagles, will open this season. It'll be Thursday night, September 4th, playing their rival Dallas Cowboys to open the season. So that should be a good one. But as far as the other games go, we've got actually a Super Bowl rematch. So another one with the Eagles against the Chiefs, but this time it's going to be at Arrowhead Stadium. And of course, the Chiefs and Eagles have met in 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls, splitting that series 1-1. And there's another good one, Chiefs versus Bills. Now this has turned into a very good rivalry. Now the Bills have beat the Chiefs each of the last 4 regular seasons, but the Chiefs have beat the Bills beat the Chiefs each of the last 4 regular seasons, but then the Chiefs have returned the favor in the postseason, beating them 4 times in the last 5 years. And then finally, the Jets play the Steelers on a Monday night football game this fall. Now, this could be very interesting, Tiff, because if the Steelers sign Aaron Rodgers, which he has not signed yet, that would make this a very interesting game because it does not sound like his release from the Jets was very acrimonious or something like that. It wasn't a great meeting. It doesn't sound like, at least through Rodgers' viewpoint. So that could be a good one if he signs with them.
Get you at those SAT words. Well, back to the NBA. Oklahoma City even up their series against Denver after winning a close one yesterday. What have you seen as some of the keys to this matchup?
I think the Thunder's defense on Nikola Jokic is really starting to take its toll. Now, Jokic just shot just 7 of 22 yesterday in the loss. On Game 3, he missed all 10 of his three-point attempts. He's shooting just 39% for the series. Let's actually listen to what he said about the Thunder's defense here.
I mean, it's a little bit of everything, they're playing really good defense on me. They're really into my body, handsy, physical. I think I missed like 2-3 open looks tonight. So it's a little bit of everything, they're shrinking the ball, they're shrinking the floor for me. They're having guy behind the defender. So it's a little bit of everything, So it's I need to do a better job, of course, but it's part of the game. I mean, I think we are 4-4 in the global in the whole season against them. So we need to give ourselves a chance. We need to play physical. We need to be more physical than them, aggressive, and of course, they're favorites. They're playing amazing. They won 6, 7, how many games they won. But we need to give ourselves a chance to be close and to be like up and to just to give ourselves a chance to win a game.
Yeah, so Game 5 in that series will be tomorrow night. Series is tied up at 2 games apiece. Now tonight in the NBA, we've got the draft lottery starting at 7 o'clock Eastern time tonight. Now the 3 teams with the best chances of winning it: Utah, Washington, and Charlotte. Of course, those are the teams with the 3 worst records in the NBA. Likely whoever wins the lottery taking Cooper Flag with the first pick. And then after that, we got the 2 games on tonight. We got Boston versus the New York Knicks. Knicks are up 2-1 in that series. The road team has won all 3 games in this series. And then after that, we got the Warriors versus the Timberwolves. Of course, Steph Curry is still out in that matchup. So no Curry until possibly game 5 or 6, it looks like. So could be out a while longer.
See how that team does. Well, looking at the NHL playoffs, 2 more games on tonight, including a Las Vegas team that could be without their captain, Mark Stone. What's his status for tonight?
He's going to be a game-time decision, it sounds like. Now, he was injured in a collision in Game 3, played a few more shifts before being ruled out in that one. It's a big loss, too. Like you said, he's the captain. He leads them in playoff goals this postseason. And Edmonton leads the series 2-1 over Vegas. And we've also got, first coming up though, Washington versus Carolina. Hurricanes leads that series 2-1. So it seems like I say this every day for the last couple of weeks, but we got a lot of big games in the NHL and NBA again tonight. So I'm looking forward to them.
Well, Davis, always thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
Practitioners of the spiritual practice Falun Dafa paraded through London over the weekend to celebrate World Falun Dafa Day. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson was there and sent us this report.
a parade in London celebrating World Falun Dafa Day. Now, Falun Dafa is a spiritual practice guided by the principles of truthfulness, compassion and tolerance, and practiced freely by millions of people across the entire world. But while today is a day of celebration, the parade also highlights a persecution ongoing in China. Falun Dafa, which is also known as Falun Gong, is a comprehensive mind-body practice for moral improvement. It was first publicly taught in China on May 13, 1992, and soon became very popular, with estimates of 70 to 100 million people practicing it. This year's World Falun Dafa Day celebrates the 33rd anniversary of its public introduction, and is a show of gratitude for the positive changes practitioners have experienced.
I mean, I started practicing Falun Dafa by doing the exercises and was really hooked on those because it released tension in my shoulders and back that I'd had for years. It just relaxes my whole body and mind, and that's the biggest thing. I'm much, much healthier than I was in my 50s.
Alongside the meditation and exercises, Falun Dafa also teaches practitioners to let go of attachments such as anger and jealousy, and to develop a deeper sense of benevolence.
It made me calm, made me more rational, made me more reasonable, made me consider other people much more, so that when you know, in particular when things happen in life, instead of reacting right away, that I take a moment to reflect.
But while events like this take place freely and openly in nations across the world, it's a very different story in China. In 1999, the Chinese Communist Party launched a brutal persecution against Falun Dafa, seeking to eradicate it. Practitioners in China have been subjected to terrible abuses, from financial persecution to detention, torture and murder, simply for their faith. Retired Hong Kong academic Stephen Sang said he came to show his personal support.
And I urge a lot of people, if you think the persecution of Falun Gong is just a persecution of a group of people because of their religion, they don't see the full picture. The full picture is this evil regime will one day, without we knowing it, come to our doorsteps.
In 2019, the Independent China Tribunal concluded the Chinese regime has been conducting forced organ harvesting on a significant scale, with Falun Gong practitioners used as the primary source of organs in a state-sanctioned transplant trade. Benedict Rogers, Senior Director of Fortify Rights, urges the British government to take heed of the tribunal's findings.
Some of the things that they could do would be to sanction those who are in the Chinese government who are responsible for the persecution of Falun Gong and other groups, those who are responsible for forced organ harvesting. I think we should have a ban on organ tourism of British citizens going to China for organ transplants.
He says he stands in solidarity with Falun Dafa and wishes them a blessed World Falun Dafa Day.
And it's been wonderful to see Falun Dafa so visibly represented here in the centre of London, in Trafalgar Square, and I hope that one day in Tiananmen Square in Beijing the same will be possible.
A wish shared by everyone here. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.